Welcome to the Lightseekers Lounge. I'm Annie Love, and this is episode 123. My beautiful guest on today's episode is the lovely Jenny Richardson. Jen didn't expect to dive back into the dating scene in her 40s. Or ever, really. She met her forever person back at the age of 20 in her uni days. Life was pretty good with 2 awesome kids, a couple of cats, until her husband Will passed away unexpectedly at 46. And the future they'd planned vanished in an instant. As she shares in this conversation, Jen spent a few years healing, raising her girls, and retraining in a new career. Then at around the 4-year mark, she started wondering what moving forward looked like and nervously anticipated the perils of online dating. With the support of a mentor, devouring books, adapting her coaching skills, and creating systems, Jen tested her dating theories in the real world, figuring out how to find the relationship she craved. Jen now supports her clients to dive into dating with curiosity, confidence, and clarity. You know, going into this episode, you might anticipate some sad chats regarding loss and grief, but it was such a joyful conversation in so many ways. We had such good giggles in this chat, and clearly by the length of this episode, we could have chatted all day. I hope you find joy and a few little gems in this conversation with Jenny Richardson. Hello, fellow seeker of light, and welcome to the Light Seekers Lounge. I'm Annie Love, and I'm a certified coach for incredible humans who want to build wholehearted businesses. I help them master their mindset, create simple strategies, and take meaningful action towards their goals in a soul-nourishing way that honours their business, their family, and most importantly, themselves. I'm also a wife and a mum to 3 gorgeous boys. Our parenting journey has been, well, a bit of a roller coaster. And while our family has navigated some pretty tumultuous times, I've learned just how important it is to keep seeking the light and the joy. Even in the midst of darkness, I believe that we can find light on the other side, even if the landscape is different to how we expected it to look. Here in the Light Seekers Lounge, we're going to share stories and conversations about how we create our best life, even when things feel hard. Thank you for being a light seeker with me. I am so glad you're here. Now, let's get on with the show. Jenny Richardson, thank you so much for coming into the Light Seekers Lounge. So lovely to chat to you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, you and I have connected through the lovely Elise Danielle in her mastermind. But we're on opposite sides of the world, so we've coordinated our time zones to have a chat, which is
Yeah.
lovely. Tell me, how would you describe yourself?
Oh, you did pre-warn me about this, and it's a really hard question to answer because you do go into I'm a mum of 2 girls, I do coaching and around dating and things like that. But yeah, in terms of describing myself, well, I'm an open water enthusiast.
Oh, wow.
I live in a lovely part of the UK that's called the Lake District. That also where I live is just on the coast as well, so there's lots of opportunities for swimming. And probably about 10 or 11 years ago, I got into cold water swimming, and all water in England is cold. So, but I do it all year, and I do it in a swimsuit because I find it really exhilarating and wakes me up. So yeah, that would be the main thing. Apart from the rolls, isn't that sad? But yeah, hill rubber.
I love it. Do you do you go out early in the morning doing the open water swimming, or does it not matter because it's all just ridiculously cold?
Yeah, it doesn't particularly warm up during the day, so it doesn't matter. I tend to wake up when the sun comes up, so I haven't set an alarm for years. And so, but I don't give myself a hard time over it. I go when I wake up, and
Mhm.
quite often that's really early in the morning. And in winter, um, it's like if you time it right, you can get there for the sunrise.
Mm.
And they don't recommend doing it on your own for a safety reason, but but I tend to because nobody would want to get up at that hour with me. It's hard
Is
enough finding somebody that's willing to do it, let alone at 6 in the
Yeah.
morning.
I'm quite fascinated now. What possessed you to start doing that?
I'm trying to remember. I think me and my husband and kids when they were little, we went camping in like the end of September, beginning of October, and it was actually quite warm. So I went swimming. Nobody else was up for it, and I went swimming, and it was just like, oh my god! It just, I mean, you are literally weightless, but it just felt very soothing. And to be clear, I'm one of these people in the summer when it's actually reasonably warm, it takes me forever to get in the water. You know,
Mm.
I'm trying to acclimatise. But in the winter, you've just got to walk in slowly and steadily. You can't mess
Mm.
around trying to acclimatise because you're going to get hypothermia. So you've got to just walk in slowly and steadily, and you're not in for long. But anyway, so
Mm.
that first instance actually wasn't that cold. But from that, that was in the October, and in that Christmas, my husband bought me a wetsuit, and he'd done lots of research. It was really lovely. There was a fellow that he worked with that did triathlons, and he got loads of advice from him. Um, yeah,
Now, you and I both lost people we loved in 2016. Can you tell us a bit about Will and how life has changed for you since then?
yeah. God, it's so weird. I mean, it's like night and day because I met my husband like we had a very traditional um, kind of upbringing and meeting and all of that. So we met at university. We were both in a volleyball team together, which sounds very glamorous, but it was really just a social thing. It's not like America where they play sports very seriously. It was basically for socializing, and we did happen to do a bit of sport, but not very well. So we met at volleyball club at uni, and then when university finished, it was like we'd been going out for about a year and a half, and it was like, where are we going to move in and get jobs, try and get jobs in the same area, which we did. So yeah, we got our first house, we got married. We waited a bit to have kids because I was 24 when we got married, and I had my first daughter when I was 29. So yeah, we were doing the career stuff and all of that. And then I gave up work for a few years when the kids were very little, and we moved then up to the other end of the country. And yeah, and just everything I think was going very swimmingly. I think at the beginning of our marriage, it was very much like, what the statistics are for marriages, they're not great, are they? So I think at the beginning I was kind of thinking everything seems wonderful. I mean, obviously you have ups and downs, but you're thinking everything seems wonderful, but does everybody think that? And then
Mm.
something is going to happen that you end up despising each other or whatever. And and that didn't happen. I mean, we did have ups and downs like every marriage does, and the move up to the north of this country was really hard for me because the kids were little. I didn't have any friends up here, and all my family was down south. So that was a tricky period for us. But we were just coming into the kids were 9 and 10. And we were in the last couple of years, we were really coming into like they're not as like they don't need you every minute of the day.
Mm.
And they're not
It
waking
is
up
the
at
sweet spot, I reckon, around 9 or 10.
yeah, but they weren't waking up at ridiculous o'clock, so we weren't sleep deprived, which is always better, isn't it? I think when you're knackered, you're not your best
Mm.
morning. So, yeah, we were just coming into that period, and and then he passed away really suddenly. He had an operation on some varicose veins on his leg, so it was like local anaesthetic, no complications, dead easy, went back to work, all of that stuff, and then 3 weeks later he collapsed on his way into work, and he'd got a blood clot in his leg
Mm.
that had travelled to his lung. And they got him to the hospital and everything, but within 24 hours he had passed away. And God, even now I can feel that in my chest.
Mm.
It's just like
I
that
bet.
was literally. I remember my boss at work texting me because I'd messaged her. I wasn't in work that day, and I messaged her saying, "Oh God, something's happened. Will's in hospital." And she messaged me the next day um, to just check on how I was doing to see if I was going to be in the office. And I think I sent back, like, a really blunt text, like, "He's died." And she's like, "What the fuck?" You know, it
Mm.
was, yeah, it was just I think that shock I honestly don't think that if somebody's got a long illness, I don't think it prepares you. I don't think even if somebody's got something and you know it's, you know, end of life and all of that, I honestly don't think anything can prepare you. But that was just like, yeah, I can't even put it into words even now. And I
Mm.
remember the probably a good year after he passed away, I kept thinking, "This is a joke."
Mm.
He's gonna walk in and go, "You know what? I went too far this time." You know, "Hands
Y
up, I'm sorry."
yeah, you
It was
crazy
just like,
joker.
yeah, yeah, and I would have probably killed him. But it's like, yeah, yeah, you can't prepare for it, and I think when it happens, you just you just have to do one day at a time, 1 hour at a
Mm.
time sometimes because it's
What
horrendous.
yeah, one moment at a
Um,
time. And so
yeah.
you were you 2 the same age?
He was 6 years older than me, so he was
Okay.
45 at the time, and
Yeah,
I just turned 40.
yeah.
So, yeah, so he was just about to turn 46.
Mm. You're not anticipating a 45-year-old to just go to
No,
work and not come home?
no, and he was so fit as well. He'd got into, like, as the kids were getting a bit older, we'd actually got hobbies back in a life, and he'd got into road cycling.
Mhm.
And he'd always been quite into sports. He'd always done like rugby and stuff like that. So he wasn't particularly built for cycling, but he really enjoyed it. And he had all the gear, you know, the men in lycra. It was not a good look, but you know, needs must. He used to bike for sort of 50 miles every weekend,
Mm.
um, with his friend. And it was like, yeah, he was not the demographic you'd be expecting
No.
to get something like that. And I think probably, I think that was one of the hardest things to kind of come to terms with. It gave me a bit of like health anxiety because
Mm.
he had no symptoms. I worked at a doctor's surgery at the time, so I knew what the signs of a DVT were, and he
Mm.
didn't have any. He was a bit tired. That was the only symptom he had. And so I think that lack of warning, even looking back, going, what could we have done differently? Because your brain naturally wants to go there, doesn't it?
Mhm.
To try and think
Yeah.
that there's some way that we could have prevented it. Um, and there just wasn't anything.
Mm.
So I think that was the other thing, Morris. And also he was a bit resistant to going to the doctor. So I have a feeling that even if he'd had symptoms, I'm not convinced he'd have gone.
Mm.
But yeah, that was really hard. And I think the first 2 years after somebody passes away, I think when somebody passes away that you live with, I do think it's very different to losing, you know, a friend, you know, even a
Mm.
really close friend or somebody that you don't live with, because the whole dynamic of the house changes. And
Absolutely.
I guess as well when it's a spouse, it also affects the finances and all of that. I mean, thankfully,
Mm.
um, Will was, you know, he was very good with finances, and we when we bought our first house together, we got life insurance and stuff like that. If that hadn't been in place, it would have been, you know, there's like another layer of worry
Mm.
and anxiety on top of it, thinking that you can't manage. And thankfully, we didn't have to move house or anything like that. But
Yeah.
yeah, there was some planning that had gone on, thankfully, early on before you're even contemplating these things.
Mm.
Made at least that wasn't something I was having to worry
Ah,
about.
absolutely. Because there's enough already, really. Like
Mm,
between your own grief and your
yeah,
children and funeral arrangements and all of the things that you don't anticipate that you're going to have to do for a long time.
yeah,
And to be worried about finances as well would have been, yeah, extra hard.
yeah, yeah. So I was in a very privileged position given the situation I was in.
Yeah.
I was very thankful for that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, when you're talking about the funeral as well, that was so hard because I remember the planning of it. And the guy who was doing the service came round to have a chat with us and, you know, to start writing what we wanted to say in the service. And they were asking me about stories to share. And literally, not a thing. You wouldn't have thought I've been with this person for 20 years. My mind just went absolutely blank
Mm.
to think, "Oh my god," and then I felt awful. I felt really guilty that I didn't have any anecdotes to share. And thankfully, my mum and particularly my dad was, like, really good at getting organised with that, and he
Yeah.
he started sharing stuff, and then that kind of seemed to open me up a little bit, but initially, for the first week or so, I was like, "Nothing's coming.
Mm.
This is
The joys
terrible.
of grief, right?
This is gonna be an awful service." Jenny not with anything to say about her husband. It was awful. But yeah,
Ah, gosh, isn't it funny? It's funny that we can laugh about these things when at the time it probably felt like catastrophic that you couldn't think about nice stories about your husband.
well, I mean, you've got to laugh. I think almost as well, it does bring out a little bit of dark humour. Like
Oh,
I see
totally.
my kids now, um, when people put their foot in it with them, they because they're starting to get jobs and stuff like that, and people and Father's Day came around and somebody mentioned, "Oh, what are you doing for Father's Day?" And the kids are just dead blunt. "Oh, my dad died." And then they quite enjoy watching people's discomfort. It's like you really need to stop doing that. It's not
It's you've got to take the perks when you can.
well, fine, yeah, make them feel
So I imagine that there was a fairly long period of just finding your feet and getting used to this new normal with the wheel-shaped hole in your lives.
Mm.
Um, did there come a point where you started thinking about whether you were ready to date again?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know why it occurred to me so like early on, like in the first year, and I think probably because people had said it to me, like trying to be comforting and it not landing quite right, but just going, "You'll find somebody else," and it's like, I don't want anybody else,
Mm.
you know.
People say
So
the darndest things.
I mean, you've got to laugh about it because some people say nothing, and that offends you, and then when people do try, they put their foot in it. So generally, I'm quite forgiving. You know, with the passage of time, I think people say things that are meant to be really soothing, and they don't land right. But yeah, so people had said that to me. A few people had said that to me quite early on, which I definitely wasn't ready for. But I think that got the cogs turning, thinking I was so lucky to have met him so young as well and met a
Mm.
really good one. I mean, I went out with some idiots before I met my husband, but I think I like to think I'm quite a quick learner. And then when I met him, he was a bit older than me and he'd had a few more relationships and he had a son as well, who was 3 when we met. And and he wasn't yeah, he didn't seem to be cautious from having had those experiences of relationships that didn't work out as well. He was very
Mm.
open. Um, so yeah, so I think I felt very lucky, which sounds like a wonderful thing. And I have posted on social media about this, where even something that sounds very positive, you can use against yourself. And I was very
Mm.
much, I was really lucky to have met him, and I'm never going to be that lucky again. And and then having to do like with the work that I do now, doing some work on recognizing that isn't a helpful thought to have.
Mm.
But I do remember having that quite early on. And then it was probably around the 3.5 year mark where I was like, the kids were a little bit older. And so I chatted to them about it because I didn't want it to be a secret or anything to be ashamed of. But yeah, it was probably around the 3.5 year mark where I thought I might want to kind of like dip my toe in, see what it's like, because you do only hear either the amazing fairy tales
Absolutely.
or the absolute horror stories. And there is a hell of a lot in the middle. um, but I think people are just more vocal about the horror stories. So yeah, so it was very much like, I'm going to dip my toe in and just see what this is like. Um, Also, by that stage, I'd been on my own for 3.5 years and I was quite content on my own. I
Mm.
didn't have this, like I didn't feel particularly lonely. Um, I have a very close relationship with my kids, and it had just been us in a little huddle. Um, this was pre-COVID as well. So that huddle got a little bit tighter for a while after COVID hit. But it was just I think it was just before COVID, that I went on the dating apps for the first time. Um, yeah, and that was an experience.
I can imagine.
I have to be I have to say it wasn't an unpleasant experience, um, but it was a bit eye-opening,
Mm,
because I think that there's a lot that can get lost in text messages, and obviously that's how
totally.
these things start, and I'm
Mm,
not a great texter. Like, when I looked back, one of the most heartbreaking things when I looked back when Will died, I looked back at our text message and it was shit. It was awful. It was like 3 weeks before he died. It was like, "I'll meet you in the toilets in Debenhams. Amber needs to go to the loo." Or something like that. It was like there
so
wasn't
heartfelt and loving.
I know, there wasn't because we saw each other every day, um, and spent quality time together every day and had conversations. We just didn't text in between.
Mm.
So when I look back at it, I thought, "Is that that's the representation of our marriage?" It was awful.
No
So I was very
stories, no text messages.
no, I was what an awful wife. So, so yeah, I'm not a great texter, and that has been a skill I've had to get better at. Hands up, I'm still not brilliant at it. My I'm well renowned for like typos. I swear to God that my phone is working against me where you're typing something and it's correct, and as you press send, it changes words. It's like it makes I sound like I'm drunk on text a lot
Oh,
of the
too
time. So
funny. And, look, in your defense, that you probably weren't doing a lot of texting and dating apps when you were in your 20s at uni because
no,
they probably
they
didn't
didn't
exist.
exist. No, and I love that. I remember being
Yeah.
very resistant to mobile phones. I like leaving the house and nobody being able to contact me or know where I am. But I've come to value it actually with teenage kids. It's nice to know
Mm,
where
where
everybody is
they
and
are.
everybody's yeah,
Absolutely.
no, yeah.
Yeah,
So
can relate. So, um, what did you learn about yourself along the way on your dating journey?
yeah, I think for me, like I said before, that I was very content on my own. I like my own company. I've got quite a lot of interests. So I didn't have I suppose when the kids get older, there might have been like a gap of, time
Yeah.
that I would have available. But at the point I started dating, I didn't feel like I desperately needed a relationship.
Mm.
Um, but that said, I think and I felt quite settled emotionally, like I'd come to terms with what had happened. And whilst there are still a few ups and downs, the waves of it aren't as massive as
Mm.
they were at the beginning. So, but when I went on the dating apps, I realized there was things like that story that I related about figuring out about being lucky and then figuring out that story that actually I was using that against myself. I would never have figured that out until I started dating. So
Mm.
sometimes when people think, "Am I ready to date?" I always think, if you're thinking, "Are you ready to date?" I think you've got to go for it because there are going to be things that you can only learn when you're doing it. It's like any job. You
Mm.
can't read about driving and think about it and be good at it. You've
Mm.
go out there and have some lessons. So I think that was an early kind of story, unhelpful story that came up, and there have been more of those as I've dated. So I went on first, and it was really interesting. I think I was on the apps for a couple of months, and just trying to figure out the rules as well because it's very different online dating to dating in person.
Mm.
And there are cultural differences between like the American style of dating, I would call it, versus I think the rest of the world. The rest of us don't do it quite the same way they do it. Um, but I'm not averse to it either. I spent a year in America when I was 19, and so and I love America, so I kind of got exposed to a little bit of that and how it was different from the way that we do it. Um, but yeah, so figuring out those rules and what felt good to me, whilst also kind of being a bit efficient with it, because there's some people come to me and I never did this, but only talk to one person at a time,
Mm.
and um, and I mean, aside from it not being very efficient, it kind of like makes you very focused in a slightly unhealthy way on one person being right.
Mm.
Um, and and I don't think that's overly helpful for anybody. I think at the talking stage, at least, talk to quite a few people,
Mm.
because there are so many people that drop off. I think something the statistics I've read is something like 70% of people, and I would say even more, are talking to more than one person when they're on the
Yep.
dating app. So as you're talking to people, you realise some people, they're not into the same things you are, or there's some other way you're incompatible, um, and they just drop off. And if you're only talking to one person, you've been talking to them for a few weeks, and then suddenly they decide they're not for you, and you think, oh God, I'll start again. Whereas
Mm.
if you're already chatting just in a very light way with a few different people, then it doesn't feel quite so catastrophic. So I think I learned that pretty quickly. But at the end of that first round of dating, I realised that I was picking very, what I would say, very safe people. Is that I didn't want, unconsciously, this was all happening. It was
Mm.
only when I kind of did a bit of a retrospective look at it when I decided I'm not quite ready yet. I think I'm going to give this a miss for a few months. Um, it was only when I looked back and did the kind of like a very business-like evaluation of what had gone on and the people I've been choosing. Um, I was like, yeah, I'm picking people that don't threaten my relationship with Will. So
Mm.
they're not better than him in any way.
Yeah.
Um, and I thought, God, that's so interesting. Again, I'd been doing all of that really unconsciously. I'd been choosing people that perhaps I wasn't that attracted to. I was choosing people that lived miles away. So I was going to be able to, really interestingly, physically keep them at a distance.
Mm.
Um, and it was only looking back that I was like, this is interesting. Why am I doing this? Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, so I think there are certain things that you can only learn, some of the things in you that still need a little bit of work on, if you feel inclined, that can really only come up when you're in a relationship with another person. And by relationship, it doesn't have to be a dead, intimate, exclusive one. It's just when you're on dates and things like that. It can be interesting to look at your choices and and all of that kind of stuff, because it does bring stuff up to the surface that you're like, I still need to look at that.
Yeah, and what amazing insights to have, but also a reminder of how important it is to reflect on these things, like not just to keep making the same mistakes or, keep choosing the people that aren't really the right people for you.
Yeah, yeah, and it's really interesting. I didn't, because obviously my relationship history and the way that I lost Will is a bit different to a lot of people on the dating app. So a majority of the people on the dating apps, they've had a relationship breakdown. So I appreciate that they're coming from things from quite a different emotional standpoint.
Mm.
And but I found with the people I've coached, but also with the people I've been on dates with, is that um, kind of attracting the same type of people. It's really interesting how, even when something hasn't worked, wasn't particularly healthy, that it still feels familiar and comfortable. Like
Mm.
from your in your nervous system, I'm used to this behavior. And
Mm.
that can be really interesting. It's just like that you attract and then want to have what feels familiar to you.
Mm.
Um, And I think that can particularly be frustrating if you've been through unhealthy relationships, or not happy ones, and
Mm.
it feels like you're caught in a cycle.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And did
yeah.
you call in any support, any kind of mentoring while you were going through the dating process?
Yeah, I did before. I because I think I was in that stage for about 6 months where I was like, "Am I ready? Am I ready?" And I was very nervous. And I'm sure my first date, I thought, and the tech thing as well. I think I am a bit of a technophobe. So I manage Zoom, and I've learned a lot of tech over the years as I've had to with like the business side of things. But at the time, I was like, oh my god, I've got to figure out how to write a dating app. And do you swipe left? Is that a good thing or is it right? I was like, and I did at the very beginning. I got rid of a lot of people that were like really nice because I'd swiped the wrong way. How do I get
Uh,
them back?
too funny. I wouldn't
I
know, so
I know, and
can
actually talking
understand.
about it now, I'm still not sure I've got it right, but anyway, it works. But, yeah, sorry, I've forgotten the question. I went off on a tangent there, didn't I?
Did you call in support?
Yes. Oh, yes. So I did beforehand. I worked with a lady and she wasn't particular I wasn't particularly her ideal customer really. She was, more working with people that had had, like, really unhealthy relationship patterns, which wasn't me, but actually I couldn't find anybody that was just helping very nervous 40 somethings with dating for the first time. But she was lovely. So whilst a lot of the work that she did with it was like a small group program, wasn't really applicable. It was really helpful actually as like an insight into how you can dive deeper into like the stories and the meanings we put on things. That was helpful. And I did have a one-to-one session with her about like how do you pick a dating app?
Mm,
Um, and she said, "Well, maybe don't use a dating app. You don't have to. You could just join some social groups and join things that are going to have mixed,
mm,
genders." Because I think a lot of my sports and fun things that I do are very much like women focused.
mm.
Um, so yeah, so she suggested things like that, and in the end, I didn't go with that. I did just go, you know what, just pick an app, and I met up with a friend of mine who lives in London, and we met up in the middle of the country, and we had a few cocktails, and she helped me do my profile. So that was how that was how
I
it
reckon
started.
that's a really familiar story. I think there's probably a lot of people that do dating apps like that.
Yes, yes, definitely. And also that's well, not the weird thing, I guess, but when you're a mum, like you go through the photos on your phone and you're like, they're all of the kids. There is not a single picture of me either on my own or without the kids next to me. And so that was a bit of a challenge, thinking, God, right, I'm gonna have so my friend did take a couple of photographs of me just so that we had something to show because it was like there was nothing. Or the kids have taken it and there's like a finger over the lens or something like that.
Ah, too funny.
Yeah.
I Yeah, I imagine there's a lot more, um, things to consider when you're a mum in your 40s and you've got children and a single mum as well, it's not just easy to go out on a Friday night or something if you're going out with someone prospective.
Yeah, and that I think for me, that was the challenge. I mean, normally if you share custody in some way with the father of the kids, you get some time off, don't you? So
Mm.
space to be able to date. That was the challenge for me. So in the early days, it was the kids were old enough to be left for an hour or two.
Yep.
So I would meet up for a coffee or something like that. Um, and so, because that was the big thing I had was like, when have I got the time to do this? And a bit of that is like, actually, when you want to do something, you do find time. You can be quite
Yeah.
creative with it. So, so yeah, that was something to consider. Is like, how old are your kids? Like I said before, I wanted to talk to them about it because I didn't want them. I didn't want it to be a shock if they
Mm.
found out, and also talk to them about this doesn't mean anything about your dad.
Yeah.
I still love him. I think about strangely, I think about him more. He's not here because I'm not seeing
Mm.
him every day, but he's in
Yep.
he's in my mind every day. And because I didn't want them worrying that, because I think when somebody has a new relationship, you can assume that means, oh, they're over it. It's like they no longer feel sad. Um, the other person somehow didn't mean as much because they've moved on.
Mm.
And, that simply isn't the case. It's just, and I think that was quite an adjustment as well, thinking that actually you can find love again, you can be in love with somebody new and still love Will. And
Mm.
and a lot of that at the beginning, I felt guilt and I felt like I was cheating on him.
Mm.
Yeah, it was a very strange sensation. And also people weren't like the people I went on dates with, most of them didn't ask about it. So they knew ahead of time what had gone on because I
Mhm.
didn't want them putting their foot in it on the date and then feeling terrible. So they knew about it ahead of time and they didn't ask about it. It was like a
Mm.
big elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Um, and that was a bit weird.
Mm.
That was a
Wa
bit of an adjustment.
was that almost like a bit of a criteria, like a secret criteria that if they were able to have those kind of difficult conversations, then they were better prospective
Yeah.
partners?
Yeah, yeah, because I think, yeah, because I did have, until I met my current partner, so I've been with my current partner for just over 18 months, and he was the he was the only person that asked about Will, and not on the first date, but I think it was our third date.
Mm.
We went for a drink somewhere, and he just blurted it out, but in a very lovely way, and
Yeah.
he just wanted to know about Will, and nobody had ever asked that. And in fact, what I found when I was dating was that people didn't ask a lot of questions. Um, and I think that could have been a two-way thing. I think, again, this thing about me keeping people at arm's length,
Mm.
there was a bit of, because of the job that I do, I ask a lot of questions when I've got clients with me. So I think I'm very good at asking questions. And when people ask me a question, I would generally say I'm quite open and I can talk quite openly about stuff. But on dates, they either didn't ask many questions at all, or they asked not very good questions, so, like, yes or no answers. Um, and I was also very good at deflecting, so if somebody
Mm.
asked something, I was always very good at turning it around and getting them to talk again. But then that left me feeling very, "Why is nobody interested?" They
Mm.
want a second date, but they literally haven't got to know anything about me.
Mm.
And, um And so realizing that I was somehow contributing to that as well, because I think that is a big complaint from women, is that men just don't ask questions.
Mm. It is
And
a
when that,
skill, isn't it?
yeah, well, yeah. But I think as well, um, acknowledging that sometimes we can be resistant to, not to answering, but resistant because it's quite vulnerable, isn't it? When people are
Hmm.
talking. I sometimes think men, when they're nervous, they talk.
Yeah.
It's maybe not a gender thing, but I found that, like, I went on dates with people and I probably asked 2 questions and they literally just talked for the whole time, and it's like, so I think, yes, I think there are definitely things that you learn about yourself and about what you want as well.
Mm.
Um, but on the first date with my partner, and later we talked about our first date, when you reminisce back and he goes, "What was it on that first date?" He goes, "I didn't think I had a chance." And I said, "Well, I was like wanting a second date and he didn't ask me sort of straight away. I had to give him a bit of a nudge." And I was like, he goes, "Well, what did you like about that first date?" And I said, "You actually asked questions and you listened to the answers." It was like, it's not rocket science. I think men think it's something much more
Mm.
difficult or, hard to achieve. And I said, it really isn't. It's about being interested in the person, not just the package, but the actual person in front of.
Mm.
Um,
And that is a good rule for life too, isn't it? Like asking
yeah,
people questions and actually listening to their responses rather than thinking about the next thing that you're about to say.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah.
So tell me about the evolution of your career and business and how you became a dating coach from that
Yeah,
point of first starting to go out on dates.
yeah. Well, I think, after about the 1-year mark after I lost Will, we were still there had to be an inquest because it was an like, not unexplained, unexpected death. So they do an inquest. That took forever because it was something that happened because of an operation he'd had, and it wasn't a typical outcome for somebody of his age. So there was a lot of upheaval in that second year, but around just after the 1-year mark, 1.5 year mark, um, I met up with another lady who'd lost her husband, and she was about where I am now. She's about 8 years in, and she talked to me about that she'd retrained to do dog grooming, and I was like, oh, that's not like it. Just opened my mind to the idea that there was I could do something different, and like if I was going to start from scratch, what would I want to do? And because I'd worked part time around the kids' schooling and stuff like that at that point. And and then literally a few days later, my sister mentioned something about a coaching course that was being held. And it was something that helped children with their emotions. And obviously, because of what my kids had been through, and I'd had counselling after I lost Will as well. Um, I'm very kind of open to therapy and things like that. So I thought, that's interesting about like how you could help kids be more resilient and understand their emotions. And I think, it was acknowledged that yes, parents need this too. Um, but actually, if you can start when they're young, you're going to give them like these tools that they can carry through life, and it kind of affects generation on generation. So I love that idea. So I signed up for that, and I thought, you know what? What's the worst that can happen? And I hadn't studied for a really long time, so I was worried about how am I going to find the time? Have I got the mental capacity to do it? And I just signed up and did it. So that was like a year. And then that probably coincided with then when I started dating. So I went out dating and I noticed, people, if you're dating in your 30s and 40s and onwards, you're doing that because you've been hurt in some way. A relationship that you thought was going to last forever has ended, or you've just had a series of unhealthy relationships that haven't gone anywhere. So there's a lot of people on there. I don't want to say damaged, but you're hurt and you're in pain. And I noticed that because of the skills that I'd acquired during this coach training, that I was a lot more, I think, resilient and able to be a bit more robust when I was on the dating apps. And I was able to go on dates and not be very anxious. I was quite relaxed. Which when I met people, I realized that wasn't the experience they were having. They were very nervous. They were very anxious that it was going to work out or not. Um, and I just thought that must be a horrible way to date.
Mm.
To feel so that real emotional roller coaster. And you experience it a little bit. You want to have some emotional reaction, don't you? To go, I'm a bit excited to go on a date and meet someone, but you don't want it affecting you every minute of every day and that anxiety. And when I went on dates as well, there was a few people I went on dates with that said that they'd experienced women who they were meeting up with having that as well. Like they cancel last minute because they can't, they're feeling too anxious about it. So I thought this isn't just a man thing because that's who I was meeting on the dating apps. This was quite universal. And yeah, so it was interesting that to see this stuff can help not just kids, but
Mm.
it can help all of us. So I think I didn't immediately transition into the dating coaching. Um, but that's what got me thinking this is something that could be really helpful
Mm.
because while helping kids with their emotions, the balance with that is that it's the parent that usually brings the kids to you,
Mm.
like it or not. parents, we're living with the kids, and the way that we parent affects the kids, and the way that we
Absolutely.
handle our emotions affects the kids. So the kids learn how to handle their emotions from us. So I was starting to think, actually, if you can help the adults, that's not to say don't help the kids, but if you can help the adults, I actually think
Mm.
that might have a better effect. So I started to transition into helping adults, and I had a crossover time when I was doing both. But
Mm.
but yeah, and then ironically when COVID hit, I'd just gone back onto the dating apps in December 19, I think. Is it 19? No, maybe not. It was a bit later than that. But it was like I transitioned into it thinking, this is interesting. I'm gonna see, because everybody's online now, I'm gonna
Mm.
see how this can pan out.
Mm.
And yeah, I find it very, yeah, very heartwarming when you can, like, with some really simple adjustments, not just in the practical, this is how you choose an app, this is how you write profile, but like the emotional stuff that goes
Oh,
underneath
absolutely.
is so much more important. And I think
Mm.
when you're willing to do that kind of inner work, you naturally seem to attract people that are on the same level as that,
Yeah.
that they're willing to do the work as well.
Mm. Yeah,
And like you said,
definitely.
asking those questions and listening to the answers and all of that, it's just like, yeah, you attract people that are on the same level. I think when you're on the dating apps and you're complaining about all of the rubbish matches there are out there, you just tend to attract more.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I found
Yeah.
that was how I ended up kind of leaning over to the dating and the relationship side of things.
Yeah. Yeah, amazing. And then you did some further training as well, didn't you?
Yeah, yeah. So one thing I did learn was when early dating was I found, like, I hadn't been like this with my husband, but I'd found that I was really uncomfortable, like that whole thing about being physical with somebody again, and not just sex, but just everything leading up to that felt very weird, because by that point I'd been on my own for 4 years, and I hadn't negotiated that early relationship stuff since I was 20. And I honestly didn't remember how to do it. I felt just very ill at ease with it. And I'd also experienced having clients who felt something similar, um, and thinking there's something like, I don't know where to go with this. And I didn't like that. I thought I need to get better at talking about sex. I need to get better at understanding, like, my body, but also a nervous system level, what's going
Mhm.
on. Um, and so I found this training that dealt not just with the way that you think about stuff, but the way that your body processes as well.
Mm.
So there's like a nervous system coaching going on as well. And they call it somatic work, because it's like when you feel an emotion, you feel it somewhere in your body.
Mm.
And emotions are meant to be transient, they're not meant to be permanent. So I remember having anxiety when I was in my 20s, around a horrible job that I had, and it felt like a permanent state. And
Mm.
that, I know now that that is like that fight or flight response, just, and it was almost there all of the time. So of course I was exhausted and depressed and all of that kind of stuff. And I thought, it's so interesting actually to be able to work not with just what you're thinking, which has its
Mm.
merits and it's helpful, and your actions, but you can also coach kind of your body to let go of some of these things that you've been hanging on to.
Mm.
And so I found this coaching program, and I basically took all of 2022 off. I focused on that because it was something like 650 hours of
Yeah,
work
wow.
over the year. And I coached a lot of colleagues that were in that course and their friends and family. So we did a ton of coaching for free to get really good at it. Um, and I became, honestly, it was so much better out the other side than, I think I then got into a relationship. I was in a relationship while I was in that course, and that relationship ended just before I finished the course. And then I took a few months off and started dating again. It was like, you know what, this is like night and day in terms of
Mm.
like how
Amazing.
comfortable I feel. Yeah,
Mm.
like talking about these things. And because I say now to people, if you can't talk about sex, you probably shouldn't do it.
Mm.
Particularly when you're dating, it's like these are new people, you don't know each other very well, you don't know each other's bodies, and you're gonna need to communicate about it in order for it to be a good experience.
Mm.
And I think too often women kind of have sex or some form of intimacy that they don't feel fully comfortable with, and they go along with it because whether to people please or because it's too awkward to say no, or they just want to get
Mm.
it over with. And it's like, that's not what I want. And that's
Mm.
not what I wanted for myself, but I don't want it for anybody else either. It's not, I think that's a cycle we've got to work
Mm.
to end. And being able to talk about it, um, I think is like a massive first step.
Yeah.
And I learned that from being bad at it. Do you know what I mean? I'm not saying that I never did this. It was like I learned. I haven't had a good experience yet. I don't want that to happen again.
Mm.
Um, and taking responsibility for my part of it, that we should have had conversations about this
Mm.
before it got this far. So so yeah, so I think that training was like a massive up level for me personally, but also professionally, because it feels
Mm.
like I've now got it was like actions, thoughts, and the body. And with those three things, you can kind of cover anything,
Yeah,
um,
amazing.
help people. So yeah, it's stuff that I use now when something bothers me. I've had an
Mm.
emotional response to something and got annoyed or upset. It's like these are things that I go back to now, and I
Mm.
think, but I forget sometimes that not everybody has these. It should
Yeah.
be taught in schools, shouldn't it? But it isn't.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Amazing. If someone's listening and they're just ready to start dating, do you have any words of wisdom of should we just, jump on the dating apps and hope for the best?
Um, I think there's an element of you're going to have to take that leap at some point, and you don't get good at something by sitting on the sidelines and thinking about it. I learned what I was doing wrong, and I learned things about myself by doing it. And it's going to be a bit awkward. You're going to do it. You're going to do some things wrong. And actually, some of the things that I did do wrong, um, it was a really helpful exercise in learning how to communicate better. Because I was, just as an example, I was talking to somebody quite early on, and I don't one evening he sent me a text going, "Oh, it's nice talking to you. Bye." And I was like, I feel like I looked at the app and I looked at our past text messages going, "What? Has he replied to the wrong person?" Because I'd done nothing before. Um, and so I thought, well, I could have just left that. But I went back to him and said, "Do you mind having a conversation about this? Because I feel like something's happened on your end that I don't know what's gone wrong." And thankfully he was. And he came back and he said, "Well, I can see that you've been on the app. So, and you're not talking to me at this point. So you must be talking to other people." "Oh." And I said, "Yeah, I thought everybody did that." So we were able to have, thankfully, a really lovely conversation about his expectations, because he was only talking to me
Mm.
and mine. And I just, that it was a misunderstanding. So it can be a really good place to practice. Like when somebody's annoyed or upset with you, going, "Can we talk about this?" Because really, if you're in a relationship with somebody, that's the first thing that you want. You want somebody that's willing to communicate. And if
Mm.
somebody just bolts or refuses to talk to you, well, great. You found out somebody that's not going to be a great relationship if you're in a
Mm.
relationship with them. So so yeah, I think you can only learn by doing in some instances. And whilst you can work with a dating coach, and I think that's really helpful in terms of getting that emotional support to deal with some of these things as and when they come up. It also it's not gonna make it easy in terms of making that first move. It was still really difficult for me, even though I was working with a coach, still really difficult to go, you know what, let's just do one thing at a time, just pick an app and I don't have to do anything with it. So the first day I just downloaded the app. Do you know what I mean? And just break it down into those bite-sized chunks.
Mm.
Um, I think I think figuring out, which is one of the exercises I do with clients, is like figuring out what feels good to you in terms of rules and boundaries and things like that. So does it feel good to you to talk to one person at a time or more than one person? And having somebody, because I know the pros and cons of that. So if you're familiar with attachment styles, if you've got an anxious attachment style, which I think a lot of people on the dating apps do, um, and actually I don't have an anxious attachment style, I'm more avoidant, but I still think this can be helpful, is talking to lots of people at once, and you've got to figure out what that number is for you.
Mm.
So I recognised when I was dating, but again, you learn by doing, that if I was talking to 10 people, that felt like this feels like it's making me anxious because there's too
Mm.
many people to talk to.
Mm.
But if I talk to 5 or 6, that seemed to be the sweet spot. But if I was talking to 2, I was getting very attached to a person before I'd even met them. I
Mm.
was kind of building up this idea of a relationship in my head and thinking, like, almost like future pacing and going, this is gonna happen and we're gonna meet up and da da da. And it's like you can't do that. You just gotta
Mm.
deal with what's in front of you and just deal with one step at a time. Don't worry about 6 months' time, or what are you gonna do on the third date, or is he gonna kiss me, or anything like that. It's just like deal with that. So I think you learn by doing, and also figuring out what your rules are. How many people
Mm.
you're going to talk to, figuring out about first dates. Like, do you want people to ask you out? Who's going to pay? How do you want to have that conversation? Or do you just want to make assumptions that,
Mm.
the man always pays on a first date or whatever? But having some thinking about how you want it to go and how you're going to handle certain conversations is really helpful ahead of time. Because then
Mm.
when it happens, you go, I'm not going to be exhausted with making lots of decisions. I've already made them. Um,
Mm.
yeah, and about like, being intimate with somebody. Would it be okay on a first date, or do you want to put a rule on that? Or do you
Mm.
want to just see how it goes? And is everybody individual?
Mm.
Because I think sometimes people can think, oh, I'll make rules, and it's coming from a place of manipulation rather than
Mm.
being authentic to what they want.
Yeah, it's like just being intentional, really, isn't it? That
Yeah,
everything that you're
yeah,
doing follows along a certain set of guidelines and values.
yeah, yeah. Because I think sometimes as well, when I was dating in my 20s, I think I mean, there still is to a certain degree, but there was a lot more judgment around the way women behaved, and and what you were allowed to do and what you weren't. Um, I think there's a little bit less of that now, and there's more conversations happening, which I love. Um, but yeah, I think rather than thinking what were the rules when I was 20, it's
Mm.
like throw the rules out. This is like you're in your late 30s, 40s, and 50s. You can decide what feels good to you,
Mm.
and knowing that you're a nice person and a kind person. So stop trying to please other people and just think actually
Mm.
what works for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Can't
imagine
live
you're
off.
going to be a wealth of knowledge for your girls as they embark into relationships and.
Well, some of their friends follow me on Instagram, and it's just like, and they show them the videos at college, and it's like there's nothing too explicit on there, but it's just like, oh my god, this is not intended for 16 and 17-year-old people.
Oh, too funny. um, I was wondering whether you had any client success stories that you would be happy to share, that you're allowed
Yeah.
to share.
Yeah, I mean, I won't give any personal information away, but I've had a few over the last couple of months even that have messaged me, and it's where they've kind of one client uh, had lost her partner about 2 years previous, and so we were working through some of the grief stuff and all of that. and she was starting to think about dating again. And then she messaged me saying that she'd fallen in love and moved in with her new partner, which was lovely because her kids were a similar age to mine, and they were
Mm.
starting to come to the end of school and move on to college and stuff. And that was really lovely. And she thanked me for like the kind of the work that we did.
Mm.
And then another lady that I worked with that had had quite a lot of problems with like feeling very anxious when she was dating. And she was a little bit younger than I usually, than my typical clients, but she was in her sort of late 20s, early 30s. And she messaged me before Christmas to say that she'd met somebody and it felt so much calmer. She didn't
Mm.
That was lovely to me, that she didn't realize a relationship could feel that calm, because she wasn't with somebody who was like poking that wound of hers that
Yeah.
was like that was there. And and then she messaged me a couple of months ago to say that she was sat in her new apartment with her boyfriend. And it
Mm.
was
So
yeah.
nice.
It is. It's lovely because I mean this work is like not. I typically work with people for about 3 or 4 months.
Mhm.
Um, and then it's not that you necessarily meet somebody while we're together, while we're working
Absolutely.
together, but it's that cumulative effect, because I
Mhm.
think the best what would you say, like therapy, the best aha moments and all of that happen in between sessions.
Mm.
So whatever we do in a session, and then it just takes a little while for the that integration to happen in your body. And and it can be quite subtle shifts that you notice, but it has that cumulative effect over time.
Mm.
And those people met, I think they met people within like a year of us working together. So it's not like instantaneous.
No, you're not getting that instant gratification.
No,
Yeah.
no, but I do think it becomes a more fun process
Mm.
when you've done that work, because you're not on that roller coaster of like, oh, this is amazing. Oh my God, I'm in the depths of hell.
Yeah,
So when
absolutely.
somebody ghosts or doesn't want a second date or says
Mm.
something mean, um, it's it's a bit more like water off a duck's back. I think that
Yeah.
was the experience that I've had. Um, that it just makes dating. I know that sounds very frivolous. It just makes it more fun and
Yeah.
easy to process. And I think ultimately, when you do this work, obviously the aim for most people is that they want to meet somebody and have a really lovely, healthy relationship. But it's like, so to me, the meeting someone is just the first step. It's like
Mm.
you do this work so that when you're in that relationship, you can make it really healthy and thrive.
Mm.
And you're not going to be stuck in a relationship that's like, meh, because you'd be better off on your own. I think there's a lovely quote I've seen it in a few different places, but I've never seen it attributed to anybody in particular. But where they say men think that they're in competition with the top 10% of men. You've got to be over 6 foot, you've got to have a six pack, you've got to earn six figures. And that's just ridiculous. What you're actually competing with is a woman's sense of peace when she's on her own.
Mm.
And I think that's so true,
Wow. Yeah.
is that actually, that's a lovely place to date from, because then the people that aren't for you and that energetically aren't a good fit and they're not going to create a healthy relationship with you, you can just let them go. And it's like,
Mm.
and then you're there for the healthy people and the people that have done that work as well. So
Yeah,
yeah,
amazing. You can see how valuable it is to just have somebody in your corner to talk through all of those kind of
yeah,
scenarios and conversations and to make the process feel more easeful and calm and have that longer term sustainability in terms of your relationship.
yeah, yeah. Because
Mm.
it's just like, because whenever you're in a relationship, no matter how lovely and compatible you are with the other person, things come up.
Mm, of course.
That that kind of ability to communicate, that openness, and also the self-awareness
Mm,
that, like, what you're bringing to a conversation and some of the history that you've got might be impacting how you respond to things.
mm,
That, like, is invaluable, and
mm,
I'm so pleased we're in a place now where counselling and therapy and things like that are more, accepted, and
mm.
because I think there used to be a lot of shame around needing that support. And
Mm.
yeah, I'm so
Yeah,
pleased that
definitely.
that changed me.
All right, now I'm happy to talk to you for the I can talk to you for hours, but we probably should,
Rapid.
wrap it up. Otherwise, we will be here all day or all night for me. Tell me, how do you find joy when life feels hard?
Oh, I love films. I was saying this to my daughter the other day. I can literally, some people find it in music, but for me, I find it in films that I can put on, even films that I've watched repeatedly. But I do get that buzz when I watch a film for the first time. It's like, ooh, this is, like what's going to unfold. And I love
Mm,
being surprised by, the creativity that comes out of that. So I love films, find those really relaxing. If I just want to escape, and then if I if I'm feeling stressed, I always go back to exercise. So running for me, I ran for the first 2 years after I lost my husband. I ran for Britain, because it was just like all of and I now know what was happening. It was like your nervous system has got all this stuff going on in it, and it's like
mm,
you need to use that energy and kind of process it. And so it was a weird kind of therapy that I was physically getting it out, but
mm,
also while I was running. Because I think it's that repetitive kind of with running and with swimming, um, you get that repetitiveness with
mm,
and the breathing and all of that. So I can see how it's really actually why it works now. Whereas at the
mhm,
time, I just felt this urge to run. Um, and I think I know that I've never particularly exercised for physical health.
mm,
I've done it for mental health from like my early 20s. Um, so I'm pleased I found that as an
mm,
outlet. So swimming and running for me, things that
mm,
are generally outdoors, I find very soothing. And talking to friends, I
mm.
have me and my sister have got a very close relationship, and we can just verbally vomit on each other and tell each other, when you're annoyed or upset, and you can just say it as it is. Um, and I have a couple of friends like that. I'm very lucky that I've got a
Mm.
couple of friends that I can vent and vice versa. And I find that very therapeutic as well.
That is handy to have those people in your life.
Yeah.
How do you look after you? Is there any sort of regular self-care practices that you have?
Um, I journal. Other than the exercise, I do journal. I don't do it every day. I used to when I was a kid. You just write down all the mundane stuff that happens in your day. But now I tend to do it when I'm needing to process something. I think I'm quite a thinky person. You would class me as an overthinker. It really helps me to understand why I'm feeling a certain way as part of the process of like working through it. So I do journal um, when I'm feeling anything strong. So that can be good or, like happy emotions, or it can be
Mm.
stress, whatever. Um, yeah, and I like pampering and stuff. So if you look at my bathroom cabinet, there's a load of face masks and hair masks and lots of hair products. So when I'm feeling like that, it's just like I'm one of the weird people in COVID who still shaved my legs. Like the internet was full of people making jokes about the fact that they hadn't like done a hair removal for 6 months. And even though I didn't, if I didn't leave the house, I still wanted to, yeah, look after myself
Feel
physically.
good. Mm.
Yeah, 'cause it made me feel better to just get
Mm.
ready. I wasn't leaving the house. So,
Yep.
yeah, just
Yep.
yeah, having
Love
lots
it.
of useless beauty products. I'm sure they don't do it.
So long as they make you feel good, that's all that matters.
Well,
Do you have a quote or a mantra that has helped you find inspiration or motivation when you've needed it most?
yeah, I mean, I love Maya Angelou quotes because she is such an amazing person. And
Mm.
there's a couple. There's one that I think I've posted. I've posted both of them on my Instagram, I think, at some point. And the first one was I studied her at A level. I know why the caged bird sings,
Mhm.
and I'm sure it's from that. And one of them was um, expect the best, be prepared for the worst, and then be unsurprised by anything in between.
Mm.
That kind of seemed to fit where with life in general. Um, And another one that I use with clients quite a lot is because people can beat themselves up. We all do it for like decisions that we've made in the past. And I'm going to make a complete hash of the quote, but it's something like, you do the best you can with the information that you have. And then when you know better, you do better. So
Yeah.
you're going to have some information now that you didn't have a year ago. A bit like when I was dating, I made mistakes, but now I have more information or better information about myself and about the process. So now I can do better.
Mm.
And I love that because I think it gives you a little bit of acceptance and being able to forgive yourself for what you didn't
Mm.
know.
Absolutely.
Um,
Bit of grace. It's one of my favorites too. I love it.
yeah, yeah, she's brilliant.
She really is. She really is. I have a Mama Love mixtape playlist on Spotify. What song can I add to it for you?
Mm. I have a just to explain why this one. I don't go out dancing much anymore, but I really loved like back in the day when you went out dancing at clubs and one things that get you on the dance floor. But now I dance. When I have a session with a client, I once we've signed off, I don't do this with a client, but once they've signed off, I have a dance because it's a way of like if their session's been quite heavy, it can be like a way
Mm.
of processing and
Mhm.
releasing some of that. And one of my favourite ones from last year was the Miley Cyrus one.
Oh, yeah.
I can
The
buy myself
Flowers. Yeah, it's a cracker
I love the
song.
video. I love the video. I put that on and dance away in my office. So yeah, that's the one that always gets me up and dancing.
I love it. That's a cracker. What are you working on at the moment? What's coming up? Anything exciting?
Yeah, well, I've just done, as you will know, because I've been, we work with the same coach. I've done a 5 day challenge, confidence challenge for dating, and so I did it for 5 days in a row. And I'm just thinking about how to do that in a slightly different way because I found doing teaching for 5 days in a row was quite a lot. Um,
Mm.
I'd never done it before, so I was really pleased about
Yeah,
doing it
amazing.
and figuring out some of the tech. But yeah, so I think the next thing for me is figuring out how to do that in a way and maybe have it as like recording it and
Mhm.
having it available on YouTube or something like
Mhm.
that. Because I think the lessons there was a lot of information in them, and sometimes I think you need to be able to consume them at maybe at a slower pace, is what I'm
Mm.
thinking as I went through it. I realised that this is a lot of brand new information for people, so it can be a bit much to be. It's a bit like if you have
Mm.
therapy every day of the week.
Yeah.
It's not particularly helpful. You need time to like absorb the information and
Mm.
integrate it
Yeah.
and think about it and all of that and then move on to the next thing. I think if you're plowing through stuff like in a 5 day challenge, I think it needed to perhaps be a little bit lighter.
Mm.
So I love the information that was in it, but I'm thinking of how can I use that to help people in a better way,
Mm.
and give them more breakthroughs. So I think that's what's
Well,
next.
how great. Just like dating, business is similar in that you wouldn't have known that had you not given it a go.
Yeah, I worked with another coach previously, and she was a business coach, and she was also dating. So we had a bit of back and forth. And like, honestly, this is so because I worked with a coach years ago that was her thing was like, you need to meet people, tell them what you do, and make offers to help them. And it was like, that's so like dating. You just need to meet people, ask them questions, ask them out on a date, because you're not gonna find a partner by simply thinking about it. You do
Absolutely.
actually that action part at the end, there is no way around it. But you can do stuff ahead of time that makes taking the action easier
Mm.
because you can work with what your nervous system's telling you. Because I think sometimes if you're feeling anxious, nervous, or whatever about a situation, whether it's business or dating, yeah, you can go ahead and take the action and plow through, but it's going to feel really hard, and it probably won't have the right outcome
Mm.
if you're just pushing past all of this negative emotion. You've almost got to work through some of the stuff, and that makes it a lot easier. So
Mm.
yeah, there are so many similarities with with business and dating, definitely.
Yeah, love it. How do we find and follow you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram. I'm Jen underscore the dating coach on Instagram. And I am on Facebook, but that's more, you know, wild swimming and photos of the family. But Instagram is where I do all of my business stuff. And on there you can see any links on my website as well. So there's a few options there for free calls if people want to see a bit what dating coaching is about. I do a free a free dating audit for people to go through if they've been dating already and things aren't working. This is like a half an hour call to get them some clarity on why things aren't working and make some shifts in just half an hour. It can be really helpful.
Amazing. Apologies. We have a new puppy and he's been happily sleeping at my feet, but decided that now he's ready to party as
Join
they
it.
do. Yeah. Um, Jen, thanks so much for coming and chatting with me today. It has been delightful. And something that came up for me was thinking that, when you've been through such a massive loss and there's been such big grief, you know, you don't imagine that you can have such joyful conversations, and I think that's such a beautiful thing about life, that we can hold that duality of knowing and loving and missing well, and yet, bringing that joy and that the new experiences and all of the things that you've learnt along the way into this new phase of life. So thank you for
Yeah.
sharing your wisdom with us. It has been so lovely.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. It's been lovely chatting. Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to today's episode of the Light Seekers Lounge podcast. I am so grateful to have you here. If you loved the show, it would mean the world to me if you could hit subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. I would love to continue the conversation with you, so come on over and join the Light Seekers Lounge Facebook group, or come say hi to me on Instagram at annielove.coach. Talk to you soon.